For almost 2,000 years, the letters of the Apostle Paul have been a massive cornerstone of the Christian faith. But what if the man who gets all the credit for writing them didn't? Today, we're diving into a really radical claim that could rewrite a huge piece of religious history. You've probably heard lines like this: "This is the voice of the Apostle Paul." Or at least, that's what we've always believed. These words, from his famous letter to the Romans, have shaped Christian theology for centuries. He's always seen as this tireless apostle, a real theological heavyweight. And that is the big, provocative question we're tackling in this explainer. A question that really pushes back against 2,000 years of tradition. Now, to really get why this new idea is so explosive, we first have to appreciate what the consensus is. You know, the bedrock that so much of Christianity is built on. See, in the traditional story, Paul isn't just some other writer in the New Testament. He's the architect. The narrative goes that he was this pivotal genius who took the ideas of a small Jewish sect and basically created the blueprint for a world religion. And his letters, those were the instruction manual. Okay, so for a long time, scholars have debated which of the 13 letters with Paul's name on them are the real deal. And for decades, the academic world has pretty much settled on this number, 7. These 7 right here are what they call the undisputed letters. The thinking is that they all share a similar style, a consistent theology that kind of sets them apart from the others. For generations, this has been square one for understanding the historical Paul. But what if that starting point is completely wrong? A new academic work isn't just poking at 1 or 2 of these letters, it's aiming to knock over the whole set. So, this claim comes from a brand new book by Dr. Nina Livesey at the University of Oklahoma. And look at the publisher, Cambridge University Press. That tells you right away this is a serious academic argument we're talking about, not some fringe theory from the depths of the internet. The whole argument hinges on this word, pseudepigrapha. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It was actually a pretty common thing to do back in the ancient world. You'd write something and then, to give it more credibility, you'd slap a famous name on it, like Plato or Seneca. Livesey is arguing that Paul's letters are a perfect example of this. Okay, so here's the bombshell thesis. Dr. Livesey argues that all of Paul's letters, even those 7 undisputed ones, are basically elegant fictions. They're written to look like letters, but they weren't actually written by Paul in the mid-1st century. Instead, she says they were created about 100 years later, in the 2nd century, by a totally different group of people. And you know, while this theory sounds totally shocking today, the idea of questioning Paul's authorship, it's not actually new. These doubts have a surprisingly long history, and that history is what led to the very consensus she's now trying to dismantle. This debate really kicked off way back in the Enlightenment. Over the years, scholars started whittling down the list. F.C. Bauer championed just 4 core letters, or Hauptbrief. And get this, a group called the Dutch Radicals back in the late 1800s made the exact same argument as Livesey, that all the letters were fakes from the 2nd century. They were mostly dismissed at the time, and eventually the academic world settled on 7 authentic letters. And that's where things have stood, well, until now. This changes everything about how you're supposed to read these texts. I mean, the mainstream view sees them as real, spontaneous letters, like they just poured out of Paul's heart in the heat of the moment. Livesey's view, it's the complete opposite. She says they're highly polished, carefully crafted teachings, a lot like the famous moral epistles of the philosopher Seneca. They're designed as structured lessons, not as personal mail. Okay, so this obviously leads us to the million-dollar question, right? If Paul didn't write these incredible letters, who did, and why would they? Enter this guy, Marcion of Sinope. He was a rich ship owner and a super influential Christian teacher in Rome around the year 150. His main thing was this radical idea that the God of the Old Testament, the Creator God, was a harsh, judgmental being, and that the God Jesus revealed was a totally different, loving, merciful God. For Marcion, they were 2 separate entities. So here's how Livesey connects the dots. First, the historical context. The Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome ends in disaster, shattering Jewish life and causing a major identity crisis. Second, the setting.
Rome becomes this hotbed for intellectuals setting up schools to debate all these new ideas. Third, our key figure. Marcion shows up in Rome, starts his own school promoting a theology that cuts Christianity off from its Jewish roots, and he is obsessed with Paul, calling him the one true apostle. And finally, step 4, the creation. Livesey argues that brilliant writers in Marcion's school are the ones who actually wrote these letters, putting Paul's name on them to promote their theology. And what do they produce? The Apostolikon, which happens to be the very first collection of Paul's letters we know of.
As you can imagine, a theory like this is setting off absolute fireworks in the world of biblical studies. This isn't some old, settled argument. This is happening right now. Almost the second this book came out, a fierce conversation erupted. On academic forums, in scholarly circles, people are buzzing, trying to wrestle with what her argument really means. Now, the immediate pushback is pretty strong. As one user on the academic biblical subreddit pointed out, the consensus on these core letters, the Hauptbriefe, it's not just a casual agreement. It's one of the most solid points in the entire field, built on decades and decades of research. If you're going to overturn that, you need some seriously powerful evidence. And this brings up one of the trickiest questions for the theory, kind of a chicken and egg problem. Why would you forge letters in Paul's name in the first place? I mean, if you take away the letters, was he actually famous enough in the 2nd century for his name to carry that much weight? Especially since he wasn't one of the original 12 apostles. But on the flip side, the theory opens up some fascinating new ways to think about other parts of the New Testament. For example, what if the book of Acts, which talks a lot about Paul, was actually written by the mainstream church to reclaim his image from these Marcionites, to present a version of Paul who is on the same page as the other apostles? It totally reframes why that book might exist. When you get right down to it, what this whole controversy really shows is that scholarship isn't some dusty, static thing. It's alive. It's a process. Big, wild ideas get thrown out there and put to the test. And even things people have believed for centuries can be put back under the microscope. And that's not a weakness. That's the whole strength of the academic method. So, we're left with this enormous question. Whether Livesey's theory is eventually proven right or wrong, it forces us to look again at the very foundations of what we think we know. If the letters of Paul aren't what they appear to be, what does that mean for the entire historical and theological building that's been constructed on top of them for 2,000 years? That's a question with no easy answers.